with you.
Thanks, Iggy. I appreciate the introduction there, and hi to everybody else. I hope that you guys have been enjoying the conference so far. And yeah, I appreciate the introduction there. Board games have become a part of my personality now, I guess. But anyway, let's jump straight in. I'm just going to add a little bit to what Iggy just said in my introduction. And actually, well, before I do that, I'm just going to put on a timer just so that I make sure that I'm not going over time here. So there we go. So my name is Morné Venter, and I am the head of school for creative technologies at Open Window. For those of you guys that don't know what Open Window is, it's basically a tertiary institute that focuses on courses and certificate programs that focus on creative avenues and jobs. So we have like film students, and in my specific faculty, we train interaction designers, we train developers, we train product designers, etc. I like to think of myself in my day job as a design academic. I obviously spend a lot of time teaching students about design and don't spend as much time making design as I used to. And in my design academic space, I'm very interested in play. I'm very interested in how gaming can help students develop their creativity, things like that. And then, as Iggy mentioned, I'm an artist. But I guess that's enough context about who I am. Let's jump into the presentation. So, as many of you might have heard, of a little thing called a pandemic. I don't know, look it up if you haven't heard about it. At the start of March 2020, all of the lecturers and teachers in the country were thrust online, and all of a sudden we had to adopt emergency remote teaching methods, and we had to start teaching all of our classes online. Now, what this resulted in is what I like to call the great flattening. This is not actually an academic term, I just made it up, but the copyright trademark is on its way. So what is the great flattening? The great flattening is when teachers and interfaces merged into one. Teachers became interfaces, and interfaces basically became teachers. And in this great flattening, we were all obviously trying our best. We were all just, teaching, arriving for class every day, trying to adapt our course material online, learning and adapting to new tools, putting up a brave face in front of the students, but obviously feeling a little bit like this overused GIF over here, where everything's on fire and the low-level existential dread and anxiety is just building up and up. And one thing that you would notice if you speak to any kind of lecturer or teacher in the last year or so, even more this year than last year, oddly, is that the longer we spent time in the digital products that we were using for teaching, the less our general happiness, or the more our general happiness started to decrease. And at this point, we're just all very oversaturated, we're very tired, we're very anxious. And a large part of that is due to the excessive time that we have to spend online. So this led me to the question, where is this supposed delight in our digital products? Where is this delight that's supposed to sustain us and engage us and help us through, keep us happy in the digital products that we use? Because obviously it's not here. It's not in the things that we're using. So today, what I'd like to talk about is a little bit about what emotional design is and what digital delight or user delight refers to. Then what I'd like to talk about is how we can kind of rethink emotional design and how we can develop the concept a little bit in order to bring a little bit of that joy back. Because obviously, our digital products are not built for this excessive time that we're spending in them. And I think that we need to think of ways that we can actually, bring back some joy into the lives of people using digital products on an ongoing basis. Obviously, your mileage may vary, but this is from all of my experiences. And then lastly, I'm going to just refer to a small case study to illustrate the ideas that I want to talk about. All right, so let's jump into it. What is emotional design and digital delight? So we have to start at the beginning. Obviously, I think most of you might be familiar with this little triangle model that I'm showing on screen right now. This is Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. Now, very shortly, if you haven't heard of this, Maslow's hierarchy basically states that there are a series of human needs that needs to be fulfilled in an ascending order in order for people to eventually reach fulfillment or reach happiness. So essentially what this model is saying is that if you don't have food and water to drink, then you're obviously not going to care whether you've won a prize in a competition. You have to fulfill your psychophysiological needs. You have to have a place to stay. You have to have friends and family to support you. And if you fulfill these needs, you can eventually move up in the psychological ladder towards fulfillment. What a great model. We've been using it for years. But then along comes Aaron Walter, and he looks at Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, and he says, wouldn't that be great if we applied that to the context of human-computer interaction and digital products? And I'm sure that many of you in the audience is also very familiar with Aaron Walter's hierarchy of user needs. So essentially, this is the model that he came up with based on the idea or a similar model to Maslow's hierarchy. So what this model essentially says is that similar to human needs, digital products need to fulfill certain criteria in an ascending order, again, in order to kind of reach the zenith of what a digital product can be, all right? And as Ben Rao from UX Mastery puts it, he says, at their foundation, our digital products must be functional. They have to work to solve a problem. They also need to be reliable. They need to be up and running at all times, and they need to be usable, easy to learn, easy to use, and easy to remember. Now, these are obviously the three basic steps or the basic criteria that you see at the bottom of the model. But then my interest is this little triangle that Aaron Walter has put at the top there. And this triangle essentially represents all of the work we do in order to add pleasure once we've figured out the usability, the functionality, and reliability of a product. So once we've got all the stuff in place, then we can finally go, all right, let's see how we can make this fun and enjoyable and bring some delight into people's lives. And this is literally what Aaron Walter calls emotional design. He says, emotional design is the pleasurable layer that you put on top of a functional, reliable, and usable product. All right, cool. He further goes on to state that the goal of emotional design is to connect with users and evoke positive emotions. Now, that's where I'm kind of a little bit interested, or where I become interested, is that the evoking of positive emotions and what that has to do with everything. Now, Therese Fessenden, who is a senior user experience specialist at the Nielsen Group, goes on to also say, what does it mean when we speak about user delight? And she says that user delight refers to any positive emotional effect that a user may have when interacting with a device or an interface. So taking all of this stuff into account, we can summarize as saying that when a digital product creates an emotional response that is positive, that is generally, classified as pleasure or user delight. All right. Now, just a note, I am kind of using pleasure and delight interchangeably in this presentation. So if you've got an academic problem with that, please keep it for the question section. But I'm sure that we can work with that in everybody's minds. All right. So basically, pleasure and delight in user products or digital products is this positive emotional response that they evoke. The next question then becomes, how do products do this? So users don't just want products, users want products that delight them. So like I said, what is the how does products do this? How do digital products evoke this kind of emotion? So delight is often felt through aesthetics in its broadest definition. In the context of digital services, we can experience it as visuals, as humor, animations, sound, etc., etc., etc. I'm not going to read this entire quote, but you guys get the idea. So let's look at some examples that you might find when you would search what digital delight means or what emotional delight means and how it gets applied to products. All right, so for instance, you've got this example here where this is basically like a small little onboarding screen for an application. And as you scroll through it, obviously you see that there's a little beautiful illustration. It pops up, it's got a lot of personality, and the design aesthetic is overall very pleasing. It's obviously a very nice little design screen. Similarly, you might see something like this, animations in notifications. So this is from the MailChimp platform. I must admit, I don't know if this has been outdated or changed in the meantime, but it still stands. When people would be able to send an email, or if they have queued an email to go out, you might get this very cute little illustration of this monkey hand and some nice copy that people have written. And, obviously the first time you'll see this, you'll be like, oh, that's very cute. I really like this. Obviously, smaller things like the change in Facebook when they brought in the emoticons and the emotions that you can react with. That's an example of emotional design. And then I've seen this one floating around LinkedIn a month or two ago that I think is very, very cute. This is a login page where you've got this kind of Yeti creature, and he kind of looks at where you're typing in the form, and when you're typing in your password, he closes his eyes. I mean, who can deny that this is very cute, and we all like fuzzy creatures that close their eyes, I guess. So this is very, very fun. And obviously, it does evoke pleasure. It does bring a smile to your face when you see it. But now we have to ask ourselves, these examples are great, but are they enough? I can only see the Yeti that many times before I get tired of him, right? Or when I stop noticing him. So is this really all that digital delight or emotional design has to offer our digital product design? I don't think so. So I'd like to kind of try and rethink this concept a little bit and interrogate it and see how we can kind of develop it. And towards that step, we've got, again, Therese Fessenden to the rescue here from the Nielsen Group, and she already kind of took steps into this direction. And she says that we can classify delight in digital products between surface delight and deep delight. Now, I really like this idea, and I'd like to explore it a little bit further. So what does she say is surface delight? She says surface delight is local and contextual. It is usually derived from largely isolated interface features. So what she's basically saying is that surface delight is these kind of examples that I've shown you now, where it's animations, it's copy, it's beautiful imagery, it's fun interactions, but they kind of isolated, and you kind of see them every now and then in the interface. And when you see them for the first time, they're very fun, but they don't really last. So what I would say, surface delight kind of looks a little bit like this. Another one of my award-winning graphs over here. You can see that every time you encounter an item that is a part of emotional design, you might have a spike in the delight that you feel. But over time, I would say that that delight diminishes to a plateau and hopefully not diminishment. All right. So surface delight is really about moments. It's a matter of moments. It's momentary interaction and momentary delight that comes. But what about deep delight? What does Therese say is deep delight? She says deep delight only occurs when the user has reached a state of flow. That is, immersed productivity without much distraction from the main task. In other words, deep delight is experienced when the interface behaves like a surgeon's knowledgeable assistant. It hands all the right instruments exactly when they are needed without getting in the way. All right, cool. That's a great way to say it. And then Ben Rao from UX Mastery kind of has a similar thing. He says a delightful user experience is often about invisibility, getting out of the user's way. We all know that something that just works can be extremely delightful. Now, I kind of like this idea that digital delight is all about getting out of the user's way, and that it's kind of supposed to be this ongoing experience, like the longer this interface stays out of your way and lets you do what you need to do, the better it is. I like that idea, but as a lecturer in the online space, I can tell you that I've had quite enough of invisibility for one day, and student invisibility at that. So I like this idea of deep delight being getting out of a person's way, but I don't completely agree with it. I think that can add to it, but I do think that we can actually develop this concept in a more meaningful way. Because if you tell me that getting out of a user's way is the way to develop emotional design and to develop digital delight, I would say that that sounds more like you're going back to the days of usability design rather than actually developing the UX space into a place of pleasure and fun. All right, so let's talk quickly about Don Norman's levels of design. Now, as you guys are probably all fully aware, Don Norman wrote the book Emotional Design, and in this book, he basically gives a designer's view of the different levels at which a product needs to be designed. You've got the visceral level, the behavioral level, and the reflective level. And presumably, when all of these levels are addressed, you basically get digital delight. That's when people feel delighted with your product and they're very happy. Very shortly, what these levels are is that the visceral level refers to the things that you see on your first impression, the appearance of the product. So it's very much like the aesthetics of what you see. It's how your gut reaction when you see the thing for the first time. The behavioral level of design, that's very much the functionality, usability kind of stuff. It's how well the thing works. Is it effective? Is it efficient? Does it provide satisfaction? That kind of stuff. And then the last level is the reflective level. Now, the reflective level is the overall impression that people form about a product over time having used it. And that's the level that links to your self-image, your ideology, and how you think about yourself and the products that you use. So the reflective level is really a bit more abstract because it connects to these abstract concepts you have about yourself and about the way that, what this product means in your life. Now, I really like this level, this framework, obviously, and it's very useful because people have been using it for years and years and years. But what I would say is that I think that the visceral level and the behavioral level of product design is overrepresented in some level, in some way, especially in the examples that we've seen so far. There you see that there is definitely a focus on usability and things working well, but also a focus on very visceral, quick animations and copy. But is that sustainable? Does that help? And then I would say that the reflective level of our product design is somewhat underrepresented in the digital space. And I would also add that I think that this reflective level or layer in this model is actually the most human part of product design. And that's the part that's difficult to bring into design, I guess, in a physical way. But we'll get to how I think we can bring that into our products. Just another model very quickly. So what we've got here is Lionel Tiger's 4 pleasure framework. Now, Lionel Tiger is a Canadian anthropologist, and he basically says, hey, we can essentially divide pleasure into these 4 different categories. We've got physical pleasure. So, if somebody gives you a big hug, or, maybe if you like the way your controller vibrates, that's part of physical pleasure. You've got psychological pleasure, having stimulating conversations. You've got social pleasure, the fun that comes out of having good relationships, etc., etc. And then you've got ideo pleasure or ideological pleasure, which comes again, which I think links a little bit to that reflective level. It links a little bit to the last level of Maslow's hierarchy. But I like the way that Lionel Tiger thinks about these things. But the one thing that this model makes abundantly clear to me is that there is an extreme focus on human qualities of experience and human values. Things like self-expression, discovery, curiosity, communication, connection, collaboration, all these beautiful words that we like to hear all the time. And I think that this is the key to how we can actually develop our digital designs and the emotional design space. So one thing that I would like to say, I thought that this was very clever, so I'm going to read it out here. It says, digital design should not be making products more human, but rather that digital design should focus on letting users be more human within our products. What I mean by this is I think that a lot of time spent on working pleasure into our digital products is based on, like anthropomorphizing our products, personifying our products, making our products act and look a lot more human, very cute and animated and stuff like that. But what's actually happening is, like I mentioned with the great flattening at the beginning, that our life, our humanity is being diminished through the use of these products at the same time. The products become more lively and we grow dead on the inside. So what I would propose is a little bit of a flip on that. We can keep the cute animations, don't get me wrong, but I think that we do have to focus a little bit more on these human values. So my 2 solutions to this problem is that, firstly, digital delight and pleasure should be a matter of ongoing experience within a product. And secondly, our product should emphasize human values and experiences. And to that end, I want to unveil my grand new emotional design model that I've developed, that I think kind of goes a little bit more towards what I think we should be focusing on. And obviously, this model is open to critique. This is its first public unveiling, so you're welcome to critique it. But what we've got here is that I think that this idea of pleasure shouldn't be this little thing that we add at the very top once we've developed everything else in the product, but rather it should be something that is focused on throughout the product on every level of its conceptualization. But more importantly, I think that what should underpin every single product that we develop is human experiences and values, things like curiosity, discovery, self-expression, collaboration, all of those beautiful things that I just mentioned coming out of the previous slide. I think that, you know, we're seeing things like Zoom kind of moving in that direction. You know, the fact that people can put a little bit of a filter on themselves when they go into meetings, you know, like somebody can put a pair of glasses on himself, and that's very cute. But I do think that this still links back to the visceral level, the behavioral level, but it touches on the reflective level. But I mean, you can put cute sunglasses on yourself in a Zoom meeting, but you're still dead inside, right? Like, so that's not really helpful. So what I'd like to present is actually one of our educational tools that I think is actually taking steps in the right direction in enacting this model that I just mentioned. And that is Figma and FigJam. Now, before I go on, I'm hoping that my lecturers are in the audience today, but I really want to thank both my lecturers, Joke van Dijk and Paul Lewitz, especially for helping me think about this, but also for Paul for helping me identify these examples, because he's also been using them very effectively in class. And without him, I wouldn't have been able to put this presentation together. So, one of the ways that, FigJam or Figma now, okay, let's start at the beginning. FigJam is essentially the whiteboarding tool that Figma has introduced, right? So this is a place where it's a little bit like Miro that we saw earlier, where people can kind of collaborate and work together and do all kinds of things. And what FigJam has introduced is a series of very interesting small interface features that I think go a long way to letting people just actually act like humans in the digital space, instead of flattening you to just be another component of the interface, right? So for instance, they've got these stamps and these emotes. So people can put stamps and rotate the stamps and put them down on things to show their pleasure or displeasure with something, which I think is really cool. People still love expressing themselves through stickers. Then you've also got this active emoting thing. You see this in Miro as well, where you can select an emoji and kind of like press your cursor to push all of these emotions out. I think it's a great real-time way of showing how you're feeling and kind of like expressing yourself to your peers or whoever it is that you're working with here. Another thing that I really like is this idea of putting text and being able to chat in your cursor area. This gives a certain real-timeness to the chat. I admit that it might become confusing if everybody's chatting at the same time. But, if you're at a party or in a real-life event and people are excitedly discussing things, that happens anyway, right? So we are kind of mimicking that idea of kind of real-time conversation. It's not this text log that just kind of like rotely puts out each text that everybody says, but rather it's more of a real-time collaborative chatting, right? And then I love this feature as well, where you can actually use your cursor to actually interact and to like digitally kind of touch and high five and go together. I think that this kind of small change in digital physicality to some degree is a great movement in the right direction, because again, this gives you the sense that there's actually real people on the other side of the screen and not just like a dead icon that types into the chat box every now and then, So I love this idea a lot. And then the tool also, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the tool that we haven't been able to discover yet. But for instance, we can use this tool to kind of like create these class retrospectives where people can chat and reply and tell and say what worked in the class, what didn't work in the class. There's things like real-time voting where we can kind of like sort out and figure out design options in real time. I think that like these examples at the end here showcase just how the humans using the software can also develop the software in different ways and uses, imbuing it with their own humanity. So not only do the features of the program support being human, it also supports you bringing your humanity into the program, which I think is really, really beautiful. So I think that kind of brings me to the end of my little case study here. But I will just end with this and say, if we have to have be interfaces, let's err on the human side. And that brings me to the end of that. Thank you very much. I appreciate that you guys had a bit of a listen there.
Morné, thank you so much for that absolutely awesome talk. Lots of comments. I'd urge you to maybe review the comments a bit later. Lots of positive comments, lots of people in agreement with you, and also just appreciating your tone. Also, I'm getting some WhatsApps about your tone.
I hope it's good. I hope it's not like, please cancel this guy.
No. But let me jump into. Let me repeat that. How may we as designers help brands introduce more delight and friendliness to their brands?
Whew. Yo, that's a big question, Christopher. I don't think I was expecting branding questions here. I guess that, that's actually such a great question, and you've actually stumped me here, because I'm trying to think. I guess the start of that would be to kind of workshop the features and the brands, or the digital product that the people have put together, and to see, I guess, just like how people react emotionally to those things. Like, what's the it's fun to test features. I think that actually, here's an answer now that I'm just like thinking on my feet quickly. I think that user testing is great, right? It's really cool to figure out if people can reach tasks, but we're not doing emotional testing, right? Like, I think that we need to test on a long-term scale, or on a longer-term basis, just where people end up emotionally speaking with your product. And if people are like saying, yeah, it's great, like, I'm not like using it every day, or like my enjoyment of it has gone down, then I think that you can then start interrogating how you can maybe build in pleasure into these things. Like I mentioned in the model, I suppose that this is where the limitations of my model start coming in, because I haven't really decided or figured out yet on how, practically speaking, you can like build in that pleasure on every single layer, the usability layer, the functionality, making sure it's reliable. I haven't really answered that question for myself, but I think that the answer there lies more in something like emotional testing, perhaps. So I hope that answers your question. It might just sound made up, because it totally is.
Thank you. Our next, sure, quite a few questions. Okay, next question.
I hope you guys have stuff I can answer. Yeah.
What has been your biggest, how might we question to solve or think about since teaching online?
Okay, all right. Well, that's actually, I see, that's from Zalshua. So some context to the audience. Zalshua actually used to be one of my students as well. So hi, Zalshua, it's nice to see you in the audience, and thanks for joining. I think, if I'm honest, like, I think the biggest question that I've been asking at the start of last year was just like, how might we make it through the day? But I think later on it started going to like, how might I construct a digital environment that actually just brings a little bit of fun and joy into the students' lives? And I must say, tools that have gone a long way towards that have been things like Miro, and things like FigJam for some of my other lecturers as well. So I think that probably is that. It's more about like, it's not about what must the lesson contain, but just how can I engineer the circumstances online so that people are actually a little bit more engaged and enjoyable. And also, how might I get students to actually put on their damn cameras? That's also a big one.
Thank you. So the next one is from Anna. Do you think there are any spaces or products that do not need to consider delight?
Yeah, I do think that there are obviously products like that. There's, I think that products that are almost built in to be delightful, things like games and like entertainment products, I think those people don't even have to ask that question, because the inherent medium, the inherent like features and functions of that digital product already lends itself to delight. So I think the products like that don't need to ask that question. But I also think products that are really just about functionality, like let's say you've got a digital light switch, right? Like there's only so much that you need to do to make that experience delightful. You just want to put on the light, right? So I guess it's about this balance of the space that it operates in, whether it's really just such a purely functional thing that spending any time on the light is just a waste of time, or whether the medium itself or the digital product itself has features that is like kind of like geared towards the light within its conceptualization. So I would say that's probably the answer to that.
And also, I mean, I guess you also don't want to overcomplicate things by adding delight to something that might just be as straightforward as what it is, like you're saying, like a light switch.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, like, again, if we go back, like, when do you need to evoke an actual emotional response and when don't you? Like, we don't need to be overstimulated emotionally every second of the day, right? So it's about, when does a heightening of positive emotion really matter? I guess that's the question you need to ask.
Thank you. And then the next question. The next question is
It's a
from
little
Monique.
similar to Christopher's.
No, I just saw there was more questions added. That's why I smiled now.
It doesn't stop.
So the next question by Monique. How do we bring in digital delight in more serious digital products? Platform that Platforms that it would not be applicable or appropriate to, and fun animations and features.
Yeah, again,
Similar.
yeah, it is a little bit similar to Stephen's question, but I do think that, like, you can actually, I guess I want to reiterate a little bit of what I said, but maybe just add to it. It's just, Monique, at that point, I would say again, where, and I didn't touch on this, but I'm a big fan of this kind of framework or this thinking methodology called ownable moments, and I'm sure my students are like, oh yeah, I don't remember that. But it's this idea of identifying moments in your product where users are experiencing some sort of downward trajectory or upward trajectory in emotion. And if you can pinpoint that linchpin, and then you say, okay, what can we actively do here to make this emotional linchpin a positive upbeat instead of a downward downbeat, right? That, I think, would be the first step in these serious digital products. And then you don't have to add animations or something in those serious products. It's just like, what can I do here at this point for the user to push their emotions into a positive space instead of a negative space? And if that's even just a line of text, I think you're doing emotional design right in that space.
Thank you. The next question, and this is by Clara. How do we differentiate between delight and dopamine addiction? What if our interfaces are making our users addicted to feeling good, social media badges, etc.? How do we have an ethical responsibility as designers?
Ooh, yeah, I mean, that what you're talking about now is kind of like drifting towards this idea of persuasive design and kind of dark pattern design, how we're kind of like engineering our interfaces to keep people engaged for as long as possible. I think the kind of emotional design that I'm speaking about is the digital products that we kind of have to use on a day-to-day basis. It is those kind of boring products, those kind of like dull productivity tools, the G Suite, all of those kind of things, your email inbox. Like, you don't want to keep people there forever. The goal of those things should be to get the task done and to move on with your day. And I think the emotional design thing works well there. But I think if people are engineering these productivity products to kind of like keep the users engaged and kind of like stuck in that space for longer by feeding them superficial things or like driving up that dopamine addiction, as you mean. I don't think that's good. I don't think that that's what emotional design is really about, or that's what digital delight is about. I think that kind of delight is a faux delight. I think that delight is a short-lived delight. And I do agree with you. I think that delight is a dangerous type of delight. And unfortunately, I'm not really speaking about like social media products here, because I've got a huge I've got a lot to say about social media and our use of it in today's society. But I do think we have an ethical responsibility as designers to ensure that our products aren't trapping users in this kind of like faux delight that a lot of our social media channels have slipped into.
Yeah, dark patterns and all of those. So our last question is from Yoke. What are your thoughts on facilitators, teachers becoming more emotionally drained through striving to bring digital delight to facilitating online participants or students? This would probably be applicable to designers as well, that have to constantly think about bringing in delight into digital products. How should we compensate for our own digital delight?
Okay. Yeah. So what I would say here is that in an ideal world, we are, having become the interfaces, the lecturers and people now, we are kind of put into this space where we have to be responsible for making the delight in the products and kind of like performing for the students and making sure that the energy is upheld. What I am advocating for here is that products get designed in such a way that teachers and the people that use them don't have to compensate and make their own delight. By simply being in the program, you are already adding to the delight of the space. You are already allowed to act like a human in the space and express yourself like a human in the space. Actually, like have the kind of expressiveness that you might have in a physical body to some degree. And I think once our programs start, bring that in, especially programs used for teaching and for, teaching online, I think then we won't have to compensate for that digital delight. So what I'm advocating for is that programs actively diminish the responsibility of the facilitator in creating the delight and take more of that responsibility into the actual design and features of the program.
Awesome, thank you. And that is all the questions and answers. If you guys have any more questions, if there are any more questions, like I said, we'll be posting a snippet of the talk shortly via LinkedIn, and then please engage with Morné there. If there are any questions, Morné, thank you so much for the awesome talk. Also, there was one more question actually I forgot to ask. There are a few people want to know how they could purchase your art.
You can just message me on Instagram. Ironically, I don't have a website, but you can just check my Instagram and just reach out for me on Instagram. I see that there's a person called Tamarin that put that into the chat already. My handle is Morné Venter, and then you can reach out there.
Cool. Thank you.
All
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for the talk. So we'll be jumping into the next session with Kate now. Thank you again, Morné.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.